Back in the early spring of 2004, I was living alone in a double-wide trailer about 15 miles west of Lemon, right near the South Dakota-North Dakota line. My name's Eli Harwood, and I'd been ranching out there on and off since my 20s. Mostly cattle, a few goats, nothing fancy. Folks knew me as the quiet type, always kept to myself after my brother passed in '98. The land out there is open and old, full of long silences that press up against your ears, especially come dusk. I'd grown used to those silences, even found peace in them most nights. But there's one evening that still unsettles me, even now, and I don't tell this story much. Not because I'm scared of how it sounds, but because I'm not sure what I saw. It was late in the day, right after I'd finished mending a downed section of fence past the north pasture. I took a longer trail back, one that cuts through a shallow ravine most of the locals avoid after dark. Not for any spooky reasons, just rattlers and sudden wind gusts that can knock a man off his feet. I had my dog Boone with me, an old blue heeler with more brains than most people I know. Boone had always been calm on walks, rarely barked unless it mattered. That evening he kept sniffing at the wind, glancing behind us more than usual. I figured maybe a coyote was tailing us, hoping for an easy meal or just being nosy. We were about halfway down the ravine when I saw the tracks. They crossed the path at a sharp angle, 4 in a row, like whatever made them had been walking upright. They weren't hoof prints, and they weren't paw prints either. Long and narrow, kind of like a man's foot, but with claws, and they sank deep into the dry earth, like whatever it was had some serious weight. I paused, bent down to look closer, and Boone let out a low growl. It wasn't like him. His hackles were up, and he was backing away from the tracks without taking his eyes off the slope ahead. Something about those prints made my stomach tighten. I've hunted, tracked, and raised animals my whole life. I've seen wolf sign, cougar trails, even a runaway ostrich once. But these didn't match anything. I followed the tracks up the slope a little ways, Boone reluctantly keeping close. They led along the ridge, each step deliberate, until they just stopped. No turn, no slide, no break in the grass, just gone. Like something stepped into the air and vanished. I stood there, breathing heavy, trying to think through what I was seeing, when I heard a sound I won't forget. It was this dry, ticking noise, like claws tapping on a hollow log, coming from upwind. Slow, steady, then stopping. Boone whined and pressed against my leg, ears flattened. I raised my flashlight and swept it across the ridge, and for a second, I caught eyeshine. Low to the ground, but far apart. Too far for a fox or badger. Then it blinked out. No movement. Just gone. I called out, more to steady my nerves than anything, and the echo came back wrong, warped, almost like it didn't want to bounce off the hill right. I don't scare easy, but that night something in me said it was time to leave. We backed out of that ravine, slow and careful, Boone walking backwards the whole way like he expected something to follow. The moment we cleared the ridge, the wind picked up again like someone had turned the world back on. I didn't stop until we were home, Boone panting hard, and I locked the door behind us. I was keeping something out. That part of the range. I haven't set foot there since. Not even during roundup. I spent the next day asking around. Ranchers, wildlife officers, even the mailman. Nobody had seen tracks like that. One old Lakota man, Henry Tallbird, told me stories about things that walk like men but aren't, that come out when the earth shifts in its sleep. I don't believe in ghost stories or skinwalkers or any of that, but I also know I didn't imagine those prints. The next few weeks, Boone wouldn't go near that direction. He'd just sit and stare out the window some nights, ears perked, like he was listening for something I couldn't hear. Maybe it was a cougar dragging a leg, Maybe it was something simple I just hadn't seen before, but the way the tracks ended clean and the way the land felt, hushed and wrong, I can't shake it. I've tracked animals my whole life, but that night I felt like something was tracking me. Something quiet, something clever, and this is just the beginning. What comes next still keeps me awake at night. Back in 2011, I was working as a night driver for a grain elevator out of Mobridge, South Dakota. Name's Russell Gant, but most folks just call me Rusty. I'd run wheat and corn loads between farms and silos all across the prairie, mostly after dark when the roads were quiet. My route took me through some real lonesome places, empty fields stretching for miles, not a porch light or tail light in sight. I liked the solitude, gave me space to think after the divorce, and the drone of the tires had a way of calming the noise in my head. That night, though, the silence felt different, too heavy, too still. It was late, sometime after midnight, when I turned off Highway 12 onto a gravel road that cuts through an abandoned homestead. I'd driven it a dozen times, but that night the dust hung low and the moon was nowhere to be seen. My headlights caught something in the road just past a cattle guard. I slowed, thinking it might be a deer or a badger, but what I saw wasn't either. It was a single line of prints, like someone had walked straight down the middle of the road barefoot. Long strides, deep impressions, not wide like a bear, not narrow like a coyote, just strange. I got out, engine idling behind me, and walked up to the first print. It was fresh, edges sharp, not even blown in by dust. I followed them with my flashlight, watching them curve off the road and into a patch of dead grass beside a broken-down windmill. That's when I noticed something odd. There were no return tracks, no signs of hesitation, just a straight path that ended in the middle of a flattened patch, like the walker had vanished into the ground or flown straight up. I stood there in the dark, flashlight trembling slightly, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Dread. I turned in a slow circle, listening. Nothing but the ticking of the engine behind me and a breeze whispering through the dry weeds. Then I heard it. Not loud, soft, almost like breathing, but rhythmic, like something pacing just outside the edge of my light. I shined the beam out past the grass and caught a glint of eyes, tall, too tall to be a coyote. They blinked, then ducked down low. I called out, more to prove I wasn't scared than anything else, but there was no sound back. Just more breathing, slow and steady, like it was waiting. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I backed to the truck, keeping the flashlight pointed at the spot, and as I reached for the door, I swear I saw something move, smooth, fast, low to the ground. It slinked behind the windmill and disappeared. Could have been a cougar. That's what I tell myself, but no cougar I ever saw left tracks like that, or stood that tall. I jumped in the cab, locked the doors, and drove out of there faster than I should have, gravel spitting out behind me like rain. Back at the silo, I checked the front of the truck for any sign of what I might have seen. Nothing. No prints. No scratches. But Boone, the silo dog, sniffed all around the grill and wouldn't stop whining. He even peed himself when I opened the door, something he'd never done before. I didn't sleep that day, just sat on the break room couch, lights on, trying to explain to myself how a set of footprints could end in dry grass without a trace. The worst part was, I never found out if the thing was following me, or if it was waiting for me to come closer. After that night, I stuck to the highway. No more shortcuts. No more side roads. Something about that stretch didn't feel empty anymore. It felt occupied, like something was out there, quiet, careful, waiting for another driver to stop and get curious. Let's keep going. Because the next story, It'll make you think twice about walking through the prairie after dark. In the winter of 1996, I was living with my uncle Roy on the outskirts of Belforche, South Dakota. My name's Jamie McCall, and back then I was just 24, trying to put my life back together after getting laid off from a grain co-op in Bismarck. Uncle Roy had a few acres north of town, some cattle, a sagging barn, and a trailer that creaked when the wind hit it right. I stayed in the spare room and helped out with chores, feeding the cows, cutting wood, patching holes in the fence. It was a slow life, and I needed it. Winter was harsh that year, the kind that bites through denim and makes the trees pop at night from the cold. But it wasn't the cold that got under my skin. It was what we saw near the back pasture. It started one evening in early January. We were finishing dinner. Roy made venison stew, and the dog, a yellow mutt named Wiley, wouldn't stop pacing near the back door. He kept staring out into the dark, ears flat, tail stiff. We figured a coyote was sniffing around the barn, so I grabbed the spotlight and went to check. Snow was falling light, and the wind had died, so every little sound carried. As I stepped off the porch, Wiley bolted ahead but stopped short at the gate, whining low. I scanned the yard, expecting glowing eyes in the brush. Instead, I saw something strange. Long, narrow prints in the fresh snow. Not dog, not deer. They looked off. Each print was spaced perfectly, like a person walking with long legs, but they weren't boot prints. The shape was wrong, longer than my foot and with 3 distinct points, almost like claws. They came from the far tree line, crossed the yard in a straight line, and headed straight toward the barn. I followed them slowly, the spotlight flickering with battery issues, Wiley growling behind me. I was thinking maybe a mountain lion with some kind of deformity, or maybe a prank. But the tracks didn't go around the barn. They stopped at the door. Stop. No doubling back, no prints on the other side. Just gone. I opened the barn and swept my light inside. Nothing but hay bales and the old tractor. No sign of entry, no smell, just cold and quiet. But Wiley wouldn't come closer. He stayed outside, tail between his legs. I told Roy about it, and he just rubbed his beard and muttered something about not all animals walking on 4 legs. He was a serious man, not one for stories. That night, he locked the door to the barn for the first time in years and left the porch light on all night. Wiley slept inside, curled up under the table, eyes half open like he was keeping watch. The next morning, more tracks. This time on the far side of the field, near the old windbreak. They weren't coming from the barn, though. They were heading to it again. Same strange pattern, same deep impressions in the snow. But this time, they curved once before reaching the gate. I followed them for maybe 30 yards before they just vanished again, right in the middle of an open patch. No trees, no brush, nothing to jump or climb. Roy came out with his rifle and stood staring at the spot for a long time, jaw clenched. He didn't say a word, just spit into the snow and walked back inside. For 3 nights, the same pattern. Prints appearing from different parts of the field, always heading toward the barn, never returning. Each time they stopped in a different place, sometimes 10 feet from the gate, sometimes right at the wall. We set up trail cams on the 3rd night, old ones that took film. Next morning the film was there, unrolled, not removed, not missing, just pulled out and dragged through the snow like someone had yanked it out with a stick. I tried to laugh it off, say maybe an animal got into the casing. Roy didn't laugh. He stopped letting me go out at night after that. One morning Wiley was gone. No prints in the snow, no signs of struggle. Just his collar, lying near the edge of the porch. Roy searched for hours, but I could tell he didn't expect to find him. That night he sat at the table with a bottle of rye, and told me the story of a winter in '63 when something, with hands like a man's but no face, circled his father's house 3 nights straight. I wanted to call it nonsense, I really did. But I'd seen those prints myself. I'd seen them appear and disappear without explanation. I didn't believe in monsters, but I also knew normal animals don't walk like that. By the time the snow melted, nothing ever showed up again. No more prints, no strange sounds, no sign of Wiley. Roy and I never spoke of it after February. I moved out that spring, got a job up near Spearfish hauling lumber. But sometimes, when the wind's just right, I still remember the way those tracks looked in the moonlight, ending clean in a field of untouched snow. Let's keep this rolling. The next tale happens on a frozen lake, and what surfaced there, well, I still don't have the right words for it. In March of 2017, I was working as a seasonal fence repairman out of McIntosh, South Dakota. My name's Derek Lawson, and I usually picked up odd jobs in the area, fixing barbed wire, replacing posts after thaw, sometimes checking cattle fences for local ranchers who were still waiting for spring calving. That month had been warmer than usual, so most of the snow was already melting down into slush and mud. I got a call from a widow named Bethan Reed, who owned a spread about 7 miles northeast of town. Said her western fence line kept collapsing overnight, and she wanted it looked at before she brought her herd in for grazing. I packed my truck and went out the next morning. Bethan's place was isolated, no neighbors for miles, surrounded by hills and brittle patches of cottonwoods. She kept to herself mostly, lived alone with her 3 horses and a mean rooster that greeted me like it wanted me dead. When I got out there, I started walking the western line, about a 1/4 mile from the main house, and I could see right away something was strange. The posts weren't rotted or old. They'd been pulled out, not broken, not snapped, just removed, like someone had gripped them low and yanked. Some were still lying on the ground next to their holes. That struck me as odd. But I figured maybe the thaw had softened the dirt, and wind had done the rest, until I saw the prints. They were about the size of a boot, but wrong. Longer, narrower, with a rounded heel and 2 deep points at the front. Like hooves, but split unusually wide. The strangest part? The tracks came from the open prairie, went straight to the fence line, and stopped right where the posts had been disturbed. Each set of prints stood firmly in the mud, spaced with the stride of something tall. I followed them down the line. Every time I came to another fallen post, there were the tracks again, standing just before the spot. No drag marks, no mess. And after about 15 posts, they curved away and vanished into the open field. I took photos on my phone and sent a couple to Bethan. She didn't say much, just told me to do what I could and to avoid staying out there past sundown. I asked her if she thought someone might be trespassing. She said, real flat. Whatever it is doesn't leave at night. That stuck with me. I went back the next day with a better shovel and started resetting the posts. It was muddy work, and every now and then I'd catch myself glancing toward the field where the tracks had vanished. Around midday, I took a break under one of the cottonwoods and noticed the silence. No birds, no wind, just the sound of dripping melt water. I got back to work, and had just finished tamping down the 6th post when I heard a crunch behind me. I turned quick, expecting maybe Bethan or a coyote sneaking close. But there was nothing, just a fresh set of tracks. I swear on my mother's grave they weren't there 5 minutes before. Same shape, same stride, leading from the tree line to the post I had just finished. I followed them for about 10 yards before they vanished again. Clean stop. Not faded, not washed out, just gone, like something had stepped off the earth. I stood there a long time, heart thudding, listening for anything. Nothing. I packed up early and left. Told Bethan I'd come back tomorrow. That night, I looked over those photos again. Zoomed in on the depth, the spacing, the slight drag at the front of each mark. I'd tracked elk, deer, cattle, but this wasn't any hoof I recognized. Something about the way it walked. It felt deliberate. Not aimless, not panicked. Like it knew exactly where to go. The next morning I drove out again and found every post I'd reset pulled out, laid carefully beside the holes. The tracks were there too, fresh again, leading from a different direction. Bethan came out of the house, still in her robe, holding a coffee like she hadn't slept. She didn't ask me to keep going, just said, "Leave it. We'll fence it later, after it's passed through." That word, pass through, made my skin crawl. She knew it was just something that moved across the land on a schedule we didn't understand. I never went back. She mailed me a check with a note. "Thanks for trying. Most don't." That was it. I don't know if she ever fixed that fence. Part of me doesn't want to. All I know is something came from the open prairie, walked right to each post, and disappeared again. Like it was inspecting the edge of our world. Since then, every time I'm out on a job and see a single, deep track out of place, I pay attention. Not everything out here wants to be found, and not everything that leaves tracks is looking to stay. The next story happened along the Missouri River near Pierre, and what that man found along the bank still keeps him from sleeping right. In the summer of 1993, I was running soil surveys for the state along the Missouri River near Pierre, South Dakota. My name's Glenn Rourke. Worked for the Department of Agriculture back then, mostly driving out to remote tracts and logging moisture levels and erosion reports. It was solitary work, but I preferred it that way. Most of the parcels I inspected were little-used grazing plots, barely fenced, and half forgotten by landowners who lived 2 towns over. I'd load my truck with gear, mark the map, and hike in alone. That July was dry and brutally hot, the kind where heat shimmers off the earth, and even the grasshoppers get lazy. But it was one particular tract, Plot 49B, that changed how I thought about what lives out here. The access road was more of a memory than a path, barely wide enough for my truck. I parked near a dying cottonwood and hiked the rest, about 1.5 miles through waist-high grass and baked clay ridges. The land there sloped gradually toward the river, and you could just make out the water if the light was right. I reached the flagged section around 3:30 p.m. and immediately noticed something strange. Parallel lines in the dirt, shallow but precise. Something had dragged 2 limbs in a perfect path through the survey area. I figured maybe a deer carcass had been pulled by scavengers, but I followed the marks for nearly 30 yards and found no fur, no bones, no blood, just the tracks, and then nothing. I took out my notebook and started measuring ground moisture when I heard what I first thought was someone whistling. It was faint and off-pitch, carrying in short bursts from the cottonwoods below, near the riverbank. I stood still, listening. No reply, no echo, just that single, breathy whistle. I called out, thinking maybe another worker had wandered over, but no answer came back. Then I saw something move in the tree line, a dark shape, low to the ground, slipping between the trunks with unnatural grace. I raised my binoculars and scanned the edge, but the shape was gone. I kept working, a little rattled, but convinced it was just a coyote or maybe a feral hog, though neither usually moved like that. 20 minutes later, while logging erosion on the eastern edge of the parcel, I found the tracks. They weren't like the drag marks earlier. These were distinct, deep, a set of 4, side by side, leading in a perfectly straight line up from the riverbank. They weren't hooves. They weren't paws. They looked almost like fingers, long, pressed into the dirt with knuckles and a narrow palm. I bent down, touched one. Dry, packed soil, no animal hairs, no claw grooves, just that shape. And then more, in a row, heading upslope toward where I stood, my whole body tensed up. I'd seen mountain lion tracks, badger holes, even bear scat in the Black Hills. This wasn't like that. These prints looked intentional, like someone, or something, had crawled on all fours, upright, with purpose. I backed away from the trail and kept my eyes on the slope. There was nothing in view, no sound, not even bird song. It was like the land had exhaled and gone still. I packed my things and made my way back toward the truck, sticking close to a game trail that ran parallel to the ridge. But about halfway there, I found another set of those same tracks, fresh, deeper, right beside my own coming in. I didn't run, but I walked faster than I had in years. When I got back to the truck, I checked under it, around it, everywhere, locked the doors and didn't take my foot off the gas until I hit the highway. I didn't file a full report for 49B, just marked it unstable terrain, low potential for grazing. I figured if I flagged it as useless, nobody else would have to go out there. I never told the department what I saw. Still have the notebook with the drawings of the prints, though. Sometimes I look at them just to remind myself I wasn't imagining things. Over the years, I've driven past that stretch of land more than once. It always looks the same. Dry, open, ordinary. But I've never gone back in. Whatever left those prints wasn't just passing through. It was moving with intention, like it had a reason to be there. And that low, broken whistle, I still hear it in my sleep sometimes, out of nowhere. Anyway, the next story happens farther north, near the Standing Rock line, and it involves a trucker who followed tracks he wishes he hadn't. Oh, ChatGPT dis. It was late October of 2006, the kind of night when the wind moves in long, heavy sighs across the prairie, and the sky feels too wide above you. My name's Clay Danner, and I was hauling livestock across the northern part of Standing Rock Reservation, just a few miles south of Selfridge, North Dakota. I'd been an independent hauler most of my life, running cattle and horses between small ranches, always working odd hours to avoid heat or traffic. That night, I was running empty, headed back east after a drop, just me and the hum of the truck. Around 2 a.m., I pulled over on a dirt access road to relieve myself and check the back gate. Routine stuff. That's when I noticed the tracks. I almost didn't see them at first. The moon was up but faint behind the clouds, just enough light to see my boots in the dirt. But when I walked around the trailer and shined my flashlight down, there they were, 5 prints, clear and deep, crossing the road from the fence line toward the open field. They were long, not wide like a bear, not cleft like a deer, just long. Almost human but stretched out, with pointed toes and a narrow heel, like something walked barefoot with intention. I stared at them for a while, then walked the beam of the flashlight along their path. The prints led straight into the grass and vanished. I've seen a lot of strange things out here. Cattle mutilated by coyotes, deer with broken legs trying to run, but this wasn't like that. These prints didn't weave, didn't shift. Whatever made them walked straight and clean. The weirdest part? The depth. I'm over 200 pounds, and I barely left a dent in that dirt. Whatever made these was heavier than me, and walked with slow, precise steps. I went back to the cab and grabbed my camera, but the batteries were dead. I know how that sounds, but I'd changed them the day before. I didn't think much of it, just a bad pack, till I heard a sound behind me. It was a rustling at first, then a thump, like something had hopped or dropped to the ground nearby. I turned fast, light raised, but there was nothing in sight, just the wind pressing the grass down in long ripples. Then I noticed something new, The prints had doubled. Where there'd been 5 before, now there were more. 2 fresh ones beside the last. Whatever it was had come back while I was at the truck. My heart started racing. I backed away, trying to keep my light steady, scanning the field for eyeshine. Nothing. Just that thick silence you only get at night, when the animals know better than to make noise. I didn't wait. I climbed back into the truck, slammed the door, locked it, and started the engine. But I didn't pull away. I just sat there, headlights off, staring out the windshield at the stretch of road I'd been standing on. And that's when I saw movement. A figure, low to the ground, crossing from one side of the road to the other, just past where the tracks had been. It didn't walk, it didn't run, it slid, like a shadow being pulled by string. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, looked again. But it was gone. Only the wind and the quiet hum of the idling engine. I finally pulled out, bouncing down the access road too fast, dust cloud trailing behind me like smoke. I didn't stop again until I hit the lights of Fort Yates, where I parked in front of the diner and just sat in the cab for an hour, hand shaking every time I tried to light a cigarette. I wanted to believe it was just exhaustion. Too many hours on the road, brain fried. But those prints, they were real. I've never seen anything leave tracks like that. And I've sure as hell never seen anything move like that thing did across the road. I haven't taken a haul through that stretch since. If a job's sending me through Standing Rock after midnight, I pass. I don't care how good the pay is. Some folks say the plains are empty, but that night I learned better. Sometimes something's out there, walking the land like it still owns it. The next story? It's not at night. It happened under bright, brutal daylight. Maybe that's what made it worse. It was in June of 2015, during one of those dry, still afternoons, when the air hangs like wet wool, and even the birds go quiet. My name's Nora Hensley, and I've worked as a wildlife technician for the South Dakota Game, Fish and Parks Department for over a decade. That summer I was stationed out near the Cheyenne River Valley, assisting on a habitat restoration project along a protected prairie corridor near the North Dakota border. Most of my work was walking transects, recording plant recovery, and monitoring game trails with motion-activated cameras. It was routine field work. Boots, clipboard, GPS, and a water bottle. I knew the land well. At least, I thought I did. That day I was alone, hiking a narrow gully that cut between 2 ridge lines. The tall grass was up past my waist, and the sun was sharp overhead, throwing short, hard shadows across the ground. I was about a mile from the nearest access road, deep enough in that even cell signal gave up. I'd just marked a patch of big bluestem and was headed toward a series of old burrows when I saw them. Prints. Not animal trails, not deer beds. These were tracks, big, deliberate, and oddly shaped. I crouched down to take a closer look. They weren't hooved. They weren't padded like a canine. The toes were long, narrow, with what looked like a heel sunk deep in the dry earth. I measured them, around 16 inches long, too big for a person, and the stride was just as strange. Not a casual gait, more like a slow calculated march, one after the other, up the ridge to the west. At first I thought it might be a prank, someone trying to fake Sasquatch prints or some nonsense. But there were no other signs, no boot scuffs, no human debris, no entry tracks, just this perfect line of prints in a place where no one had any reason to be. I followed them uphill, against every piece of training in my head that said not to do that alone. As I crested the ridge, I saw that the tracks led into a wide stretch of flattened grass, circular, about 30 feet across, as if something heavy had stood there for a long time. No burn marks, No tire ruts. Just grass that had been pressed down unnaturally evenly. And then, nothing. The prints ended at the edge of that clearing. Clean. No trailing off. No disturbance leaving the area. It was like whatever made them just stopped existing. I stood there, sweating, heart hammering, suddenly aware of how loud the silence was. I couldn't hear birds, bugs, nothing. Just wind brushing across the top of the ridge. I took out my camera to document it, but the screen glitched, went all white, and then black, dead. The battery had been full that morning. I reached for my GPS to log the coordinates, and the screen blinked once, then froze. Everything electronic on me just stopped. I'd heard stories about interference in deep prairie valleys, but I'd never experienced it. I backed away from the clearing slowly, not out of fear exactly, but a sense that I wasn't supposed to be there. The land had paused itself and was waiting for me to leave. It took me nearly an hour to hike back to the truck. When I crossed the tree line and got closer to the parking area, all my gear started working again. Camera, GPS, even my phone buzzed with 3 missed calls from the office. I didn't know what to report, so I didn't say much. Just wrote in the log, unusual soil disturbance, no known animal activity, GPS malfunction. That was the truth, just not all of it. Later that week, I returned with another tech, but the tracks were gone. Grass had started to rise back up, as if nothing had ever pressed it down. Since then, I've avoided that gully, and I never go out alone anymore, not because I'm afraid of being hurt, but because I don't like how small I felt out there. It wasn't the heat. It wasn't exhaustion. It was the feeling of being noticed by something that didn't want to be found. The next story takes us farther west, deep into the Badlands, and what that old rancher found by the dry creek bed might make you question what leaves a trail. It was back in 1989, late fall, when the wind carried that dry rattle through the grass that makes you feel like something's coming. My name's Earl Whitmer, and I've spent my entire life out here in the Badlands of southwestern North Dakota, raising cattle and keeping to myself. My ranch is about 12 miles west of Medora, past the last stretch of paved road. Out there, it's just buttes, rattlesnakes, and wind that never stops moving. That particular week, we'd had a dry spell after early snow, and I'd gone down to check the old creek bed where the cows sometimes wandered for shade. I didn't expect anything unusual, that just hoof prints and cracked earth. But what I found that day still gets under my skin. The creek had gone dry months before, nothing but hard clay and scattered bones from unlucky critters. I parked the ATV near the northern bank and walked in, boots kicking up dust. That's when I noticed the ground had been disturbed, not by cattle, but by something heavier. There were tracks, deep and wide, sunken into the clay like the ground had softened just enough to take their shape. At first glance, they looked almost like bison prints, except bison haven't roamed these parts wild in decades. And these weren't rounded or split like hooves. They had 3 distinct toes, spread apart like claws, with a back heel that dug in deep. I followed the trail slowly, each print about 4 feet apart, leading along the dry bend. No signs of dragging, no paw scrapes, just clean, firm impressions. The strangest thing. The prints weren't pressed into any grass, only into the cracked clay, like whatever it was knew exactly where to step. It wound around the curve, then stopped in a small hollow near an old cottonwood stump. That's where I found the skull. Not a cow, not a deer. Something smaller, unfamiliar, clean. No jawbone, just the top half, sun-bleached and hollow, and beside it, another print, fresher than the rest, still moist underneath, like it had been made within the hour. I looked around, listened hard. Not a sound, Not even wind through the branches. The air had gone completely still. That's when I heard a series of knocks, 3 of them, like wood striking wood, echoing from the ridge above. I turned, squinting into the light, but saw nothing. No movement, no birds. I waited, holding my breath, hand resting on the knife at my belt. Then came the 4th knock, this time closer, sharper. I don't spook easy, but every part of me said I needed to leave that spot. Not run, just leave, quiet and calm, when you know you're not the predator anymore. I made my way back to the ATV slow, never turning my back fully to the ridge. The whole time, I felt like something was watching me. Not curious, not angry, just aware, the kind of feeling you get when you lock eyes with an animal and realize it's thinking just as much as you are. I came back the next morning with my son, hoping to show him the tracks. But the wind had taken the topsoil overnight. The prints were gone. The skull, too. All that remained was a single impression near the stump. Faint, but there. Like a signature left just long enough to be noticed. I don't tell this story much. Not because I'm ashamed or scared folks won't believe me, but because it doesn't have a proper ending. Nothing chased me, nothing attacked, but something passed through. Something that knew how to walk without being seen, and how to leave just enough behind to make sure you knew it had been there. Since then I've seen strange tracks here and there. I don't follow them anymore. I let them go where they're going. Some trails aren't meant to be followed. I still run cattle, still ride the same creek beds, but I keep a closer eye on the ground now, and I never dismiss a track that looks out of place. Not after that day. You learn out here that the land doesn't always want to be read. Sometimes it leaves a message you weren't meant to understand. Thanks for watching, and for sticking with me through all 8 of these strange, real encounters across the Dakotas. If you enjoyed this series and want to hear more rural tales and wilderness mysteries like these, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We've got a lot more stories coming, from backwoods trails, high mountain passes, and forgotten corners of the countryside. Stay curious and stay aware.